Hello there, dear friends, and welcome once again to the Relaxed Fantasy Review. On this channel, we spend our time reviewing fantasy of all sorts, from movies to books to video games, and we implement the characters that we see in those stories into the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But today we're going to be talking about something core to D&D itself. We're going to be discussing a core class that you can play as a character in D&D, specifically the Druid. The Druid represents all that is good with nature in the world, representing the magic of nature's spirits and the connection that heroes can have with the material plane itself, also stretching out a little bit more into the ethereal side of things, touching with the Fae and the dark creatures, depending on your alignment. But how does the class work mechanically? Let's have a look-see how the Druid stacks up. The Druid starts with a d8 hit die. This is very standard. It's not a full melee class by any remark, but it does have a decent amount of hit dice, a little higher than your average arcane spellcaster. So I give this an 8 out of 10. The armor that they can use is light, medium, and they can use shields, but there's a caveat to this. And this is one of those things that often gets house ruled out by different DMs, because it's a pretty big weakness. They aren't allowed to use armor that is metal. And this is a tricky handicap, because a lot of the best armor in the game is metal. So, unfortunately, I have to give the Druid on their armor only an 8 out of 10. Normally, light, medium, and shields would be one shy of perfect. You can't use heavy armor. But because you can't use metal armor, it severely limits your choices, and I give this an 8 out of 10. Now, weapons are even worse, unfortunately, because the Druid can't even use all simple weapons. They can't use any martial, and they can only use some simple. They are very, very weak at hand-to-hand combat. Now, again, they can't use metal weapons, except for scimitars, weirdly. But they can use pretty much everything simple that is wood-based. I give this a 7 out of 10. Again, not a strong showing from their weapon aspect. Now, tools. They actually come with a standard tool proficiency under their belt. This tool proficiency is the Herbalism Kit, which makes sense for a nature-based class. So this gets them a 6 out of 10 as being better than nothing, for sure. Saving throws. Now, there are two saving throws the Druid gets, Wisdom and Intelligence. Both of the magic ones, respectively. Now, Wisdom is one of the most useful saving throws in the game, one of the most commonly used ones. Intelligence, a little less so. I give them a 10 out of 10 and an 8 out of 10, respectively. Now, the Druid's skill choices, they get 2 skills, pretty standard for the classes of D&D, but they get a list of 8 to pick from, so a little bit more variety there. This gets an 8 out of 10 and an 8 out of 10, respectively. Now, one of the things Druids get automatically is Druidic, which is an extra language. Similar to Thieves and how they get Thieves' Cants, Druids get Druidic, and they can speak this special language that only Druids and nature spirits understand. There's no penalty for this, and it's just a nice little freebie that's thrown in. You get an extra language, that's a 10 out of 10 from me. Now, the Druid is a full spellcaster, going all the way through level 9 spells at the highest of power, and they're a wisdom-based spellcaster. So their spell list is a little bit small, compared to people like the Wizard at least, but they get some pretty unique stuff in there. Summoning spells and nature spells that no one else really gets, except for maybe nature clerics. But in general, you can't go wrong as a full wisdom spellcaster, especially with a spell list this interesting. 10 out of 10. But then you get what we're all here for. The thing the Druid is most well known for, their wild shape power. This, depending on your level, allows you to transform into a beast of varying strength. And yes, you transform into these beasts. You can use your wild shape a certain number of times per day, depending on your Druid level. And when you do, your stats change. Your health, your strength, your speed, your attacks, everything. You become a beast. And with the beasts not being the best creatures in the game to fight with at higher levels, At lower levels, and whenever you're dealing with anything that isn't combat, like exploration, or navigation, or heck, even social situations, having an animal is almost invaluable. Wild Shape is one of the best abilities that any class has. It allows you to problem solve anything. And while there are some limitations on flying speeds and swim speeds at lower levels, once this ability takes off, there is no stopping it. And even though the power of these beasts falls out near the end, something else does pick up, which we'll be discussing shortly. I give Wild Shape a 10 out of 10. There's no way you can't. It is one of the most useful and unique powers in the game, and the Druid is well, deserving of its reputation because of Wild Shape. So, Druids get your standard 5 ability score increases between levels 1 and 20, so 8 out of 10 for that. They also get this power called Timeless Body, which means they age slower. I believe it's 1 year for every 10 years you age, which means you live a lot longer. This is kind of cool if you're talking about one of those epic campaigns that can go on for hundreds of years, and your druid isn't an elf, or even if they are, that means they could live for thousands of years in theory. But because we're talking about something that only really matters when you're talking about long scale time, I only give this a 6 out of 10 for its real limited usability. Now, when you get to really high forms, you get to use your beast spells. See, normally when you're in beast form, you get the beast stats. That includes their inability to cast spells, but at the higher levels, druids can actually use spells in beast form. This means that they suddenly lose this one big handicap that being in beast form had, which was that they weren't able to use magic. Now they can, so 10 out of 10 for that. Also, the Archdruid power is their capstone ability, and this kind of falls in line with the Barbarian, in the sense that they have this power that they've been able to use since the lower levels, but a limited amount of uses. Once you're level 20, you can use Wild Shape at will. As many times as you want, there is no limitation to it. This takes the limiters off of the powerful Druid's Wild Shape, even more so than being able to turn into elementals, which you get to do at certain levels later on in the Druid's history. So, it gets a 10 out of 10. When you crunch all of the numbers together, the Druid is a bit of a one-trick pony, but what a trick. Like, they can't use metal armor, metal weapons. They have a d8 hit die. They get 2 skills, but they can turn into animals. This makes up for so many other flaws in their character. Like, you don't need anything other than that. This is effectively, without getting too specific into other spells, this is effectively the polymorph spell to a lesser degree without using magic. It just the druids can do it. And it's phenomenal. The druid overall, once you crunch the numbers together, gets an 8 out of 10. Unfortunately, they don't score quite as high as some of the more versatile classes, but Wild Shape well makes up for it. If you are questioning what character you should play, if you want to be an animal person using nature magic, and you want to have the versatility of all the beasts in the world, there is no question. Being a druid is for you. This has been the Relaxed Fantasy Review. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Got a lot more D&D videos coming up here in the future. And let me know down below what your experience has been like if you've ever played a druid in D&D before. I'd love to hear your comments. Have a good one, my friends.